Welcome back, everyone, to the Risk Intel podcast, powered by SRA Watchtower, where we share risk intelligence with experts from across the banking industry. I'm your host, Ed Vincent, CEO at SRA Watchtower. Welcome back to the Risk Intel podcast. I am excited to have Craig Hartman, the founder and CEO of PlanSmith, return to the program today, as well as a new face, Chris Lake. Chris leads strategy at PlanSmith. And we're excited to welcome you both to the show today. Thanks for being with us.
Good to be
Thank
here.
you. Glad to be here.
Craig, we know who you are, but Chris, this is your maiden voyage here on the program. Perhaps we could start out with a just a little bit of your background. I know you've been around the financial institution industry for a little while and have worn a number of different hats. But we'd love to hear a bit about your background and how you got into the mix here in the strategy role at PlanSmith.
Sure. You're right. I've been around the financial industry for quite a while, not just a few years, but I've actually been with PlanSmith for about 20 years. Right now I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for the company, and I also manage a product line. And prior to that, which was a long time ago, I was in the banking industry for many, many years as well. And I was both with couple of different community banks and also a regional bank before I met Craig and decided to join PlanSmith.
I love it. That's awesome. Thank you. I think that's a theme that we have with many of our conversations are folks who are practitioners who have then seen and lived this experience and said, all right, I want to enact some change and some transformation here. And we'll get to that in a second when we talk about the playbook, which I know is something that's near and dear to your heart. So Chris, thanks for being with us. Now, Craig, during our prior conversations, we began this series by exploring the topic of execution risk, right? Which we defined as referring to the possibility that a plan or a strategy or a project won't be successfully carried out as intended. And in our conversation, we determined that this type of risk arises when there's a gap between what's planned and then what's actually executed. And that can lead to anything from missed objectives or delays or overruns or failure to achieve the expected outcomes. And oftentimes it's a lack of control or controls that contribute to that execution risk. So we then continued on to unpack that and say, well, how do we mitigate that? What are some of the techniques that we have at our disposal to mitigate execution risk? And we went through a whole litany of techniques, from identifying the sources of the risk to monitoring and establishing feedback loops and strengthening communication, and maintaining agility and flexibility, and really fostering a culture that encourages sharing of challenges and collaborative problem solving. So today, I'd like to go one step further and now really put this into practice. I'd like to talk about the framework that Chris, you and Craig developed there at PlanSmith for the financial institutions you serve. But Chris, I also know you apply this internally, right, within PlanSmith as a business. So 3 topics I think I'd like to explore today. First of all, where did this concept of the playbook come from, right? And what is the playbook? Secondly, then, how does the playbook reduce execution risk across various dimensions? And then lastly, how do you put this into practice at PlanSmith? So maybe we can go back to the beginning, if you will, right, and start there with where did the concept of the playbook come from, right? What was the genesis of this framework?
Well, historically, it comes from the football game. Every coach has his playbook, and the idea is this is the play, this is everybody's responsibility, and so forth. And so that evolved then into a common business practice, and we call it the playbook. I'm sure people have other names for it, but that was the genesis. But Chris,
I love it. And so the key there, Craig, right, as you said, it's about understanding responsibilities, right? That's the starting point, if you will.
Right.
It is. It really bridges that gap that you were mentioning between planning and execution. And that happens from many different standpoints, whether you're building a strategic plan or building a budget or just have a new initiative that you want to get off the ground. Those all define what you want to accomplish, but don't necessarily get into the how behind it. And that's really stepped in the playbook, was to really build a framework or a process that is easy to internally manage, to say how will we achieve those targets or goals or objectives that we've set in any of those avenues.
So this is those concepts of right how do we achieve those goals and putting and establishing a framework, and those are not new, and I imagine the playbook itself is not brand new. When did you first conceive of this, and what does the playbook entail?
Well, I think it started when we were offering a strategic planning component, and this became part of that whole thing. When you think about it, the playbook really is the ultimate goal of all your analysis, all your planning, all of your forecasting. It all ends up in some, how are we going to do this? Because I think there's a tendency to overanalyze and over plan things, but then the actual execution, what does it take to get this done? And then what's the timing of that? And what do we expect to get out of it? And who's responsible? And then going back to the point made earlier about, from a management point of view, once you've established a playbook, then you turn it over to that team leader who manages their team and hits these targets. And if they don't hit the targets, then we have to understand that from a punishment point of view, but from what can we do differently? What worked? What didn't work? What adjustments do we have to make? It's life, everybody is moving in some direction and they run into obstacles. You have to work your way around them. So it helps identify the obstacles and then replan. So that was when Chris first introduced this idea in our strategic planning, it hit me. This is the whole point of the exercise.
Right.
Not just forecasting and dreaming about things, but actually making sure they get done. Because in the banks we deal with, a lot of times, they come up, a lot of them, I think that their financial plan, their forecast is their plan. Here's the budget, here's the P&L, this is what we're going to do. How? So
So if I were going to say that back to you, Craig, it sounds to me like you think of the budget and the financial forecast as the what, if you will. This is what you're aiming at. This is right. This is the end goal, if you will. But the strategic plan or the playbook is how you get there. That's the execution tool.
Exactly.
I love one other theme that you injected in there, and then Christine, I'm gonna come back to you and ask you about how the playbook really helps to reduce execution risk, because there's a number of different dimensions that I think that we've talked about here and that I'd like to unpack. But Craig, you talked about a theme there of empowerment, and this is a way to take a vision and even a plan at its highest level, and now really empower the organization, right? You talked about giving the team leaders the authority, the autonomy, the ability, the flexibility to go and execute on that. And I think that empowerment theme is an important one there as well.
Well, I think too, it gives everybody in the organization who's involved knows what they're supposed to do and when they got to get it done and what the outcome should be, and it forces them to look ahead. And so we, in our company, we have regular playbook meetings, and we're constantly evaluating where we're going, what we're doing, what the problems are, and it goes right down to everybody.
So I'm going to come back to how you guys use this in a second. So I'm going to park that for a minute. I'm going to ask Christine for you, Chris, to share a few thoughts on how the playbook helps to reduce execution risk. Right, there's a number of different dimensions, but I think about processes and roles and speed. So maybe ask you to share a few thoughts on the way, if you will, that the playbook helps to reduce some of these execution risks.
Well, as Craig said, it does very much clarify everybody's role and responsibilities and getting things done, because each of the major tasks that are set out for each objective that we're trying to achieve, or the banks are trying to achieve, it assigns that ownership. It sets the deadlines on when something should start and stop or be finished by, and it sets some outcomes for those as well, as to what kind of results are we expecting to get from this. And then also it aligns resources towards that. So whether it's time or people or financial, your resources and your everything is aligned towards helping you achieve that objective. And so, and then this, in our case, it's a kind of becomes a living document, because people input into that as to what their progress is. And then when we meet together during our meetings, the meetings are much more productive, because we talk about, they're become much more strategic in nature in terms of what is being accomplished, what kind of progress are we seeing? Are we seeing the kinds of outcomes we have expected? And if not, how do we pivot, or how do we change that? So you're much more on top of things to be able to make sure things are progressing the way they need to. And when you're together as a team, then can brainstorm those ideas and determine what obstacles are there and what needs to be done. And of course, when things are progressing well, you can celebrate the wins. What is working, and what's repeatable. What can we do again? That's really that's turning out very well, and we can maybe use this in another way, or deploy it again within the organization. So there's a lot of insight that you gain from that, and in terms of speed, you can see the red flags more quickly, and you can change what needs to be changed.
I think it
And
also
so that all of
pulls in,
that helps the execution process, because you're trying to get towards that.
it also pulls in everybody to see what's going on in another area, marketing and sales and support and marketing and things like that. So everybody's kind of getting a view of the organization and their own particular function within that.
There's cross-functional visibility there, Craig, right? And the benefits that come from idea sharing, and also, right, perhaps motivating someone else to say, all right, hey, I can do my part to help move that forward. It comes from that cross-functional visibility. Chris, you meant
been helpful in the virtual office, because in the old office, as you probably know, people shared while they're sitting there. They're having a problem with a client, or they're having some reward, and so they talk about it, the old, water cooler talk and so forth. We don't have that anymore. So this gives us a chance to share successes and failures on a different level. But I think that's a huge thing. I miss that a lot about the actual office versus the virtual office.
I'm going to ask you in a second about how you put that into practice, because I think that's probably also something, right, that you're living and breathing there at PlanSmith. And I'm going to try and recap, Chris, a number of the themes that you laid out there about how the playbook reduces risk. You talked about standardization, if you will, or putting in practices that are repeatable. So standard processes, right, was one of those areas. If you find something that works, then you can stick with it. If it doesn't work, you can adjust, but then you get something that is is repeatable and organized and disciplined. You talked about clarifying the roles and responsibilities. You started with that, right? And then making sure you've got resources aligned to that. This idea of transparency, if you will, that I think enhances accountability and measurement, right? If you see what's going on, you can measure it, and then you can report out on it, and then you can use that to change direction as well. And it also allows you, I think, as you pointed out, to increase the speed with which you're operating, because you see things are working, you put more and more right resource and effort behind them, and it yields the outcome that you're looking for. You also talked about training and I think maybe knowledge transfer that comes from having a standard process and having transparency and visibility. So I think there's a number of different themes there. And I think the last one that I jotted down here was the improvement to monitoring and risk awareness that's going to come from this as well, right? Clearly, risk is an important theme, right, within a financial institution. And so, by having that visibility, you can also increase the risk awareness that's there. And then I think lastly, right, this idea of cross-functional visibility, and with that, the continuous improvement that comes on the back of that, right? You're getting people to provide feedback, and then you're iterating, and you're not just resting on your laurels. So if I go back to that first theme, that if you do something that works and you can standardize that process, you're still looking for opportunities to iterate there, right? It's never set it and forget it. You're always looking to learn and continuously improve.
It's a
Exactly.
living system. Yeah.
Right.
So let's
Yes.
take a minute and talk about how you
Mhm.
utilize the playbook. And Chris, maybe you can talk a bit about the way that you put the playbook into practice there at Plansmith, or how one of your financial institution clients maybe puts it into practice.
Mhm. Well, we start with the planning process that we've, clearly defined some specific objectives that we're looking forward over the next several years, and then we take those priorities out of that strategic plan and enter them into the playbook, so that everybody understands what the priorities are on a short-term and longer-term basis. So these are generally the things, when you're talking about strategic planning, that are outside of the business as usual activities. It doesn't involve the day-to-day activities, but what are those big things that we want to accomplish as an organization looking forward? And then how do we assemble the resources to be able to accomplish that? And that, again, as we've been talking about, is the how behind it. So we take that, and each of the managers then gets assigned ownership of that objective. They're kind of the champions of it. They're not necessarily solely responsible for achieving that big goal, but rather they're the champion behind it, and their team becomes the group that takes a look at what are the kinds of things we can do within our team to be able to accomplish that. And then those things are entered into the playbook, and as we've discussed, with each major task, it's assigned an owner and the deadlines and targets towards it. And then because it's all online, it has that transparency across our organization, where anyone can take a look at, what the status is of each of the tasks or each of the initiatives. And when we get together as a group, then it does transform that meeting. We had initially, when we didn't have the playbook, when we started out in this, we kind of fell into that trap of doing the meetings were more around status updates. But now they're really much more productive, much more collaborative, and more around how can we, rather than, where are we today? We can kind of see where we are. But if there is any kind of a performance gap between our objective and where we think we should be at this stage, then we talk about that. Then we talk that through, and each manager kind of leads the conversation around their objective group, we can offer suggestions or, deploy additional resources if it's needed. Or we can decide that it's something that maybe we need to set aside and do something different. So those meetings become very critical to us because that's our chance on a regular periodic basis to stay on top of things rather than setting something in place in the beginning of the year and then looking back at the end of the year and saying, well, we accomplished this, but we didn't accomplish these things. So it keeps the conversation alive and much more the possibility of having that execution happen.
Chris, you said a number of things there that I was, you probably saw me furiously scribbling down, capturing some of the thoughts along the way there. But I think that perhaps gets fully encompassed under the fact that there is a tool, right, and you have constructed a tool that brings transparency and right through the ability to manage tasks and deadlines and accountability. So there is a tool, and that is an important enabling component here. But it's a mindset as well. And Craig, we talked about this, previously, about a culture that encourages, right, sharing challenges and collaborative problem solving. And I loved your description, Chris, of using your meetings no longer as status updates, right? That's the old way of doing things, right? The new way of doing things here is with this tool set in place, you're enabling those meetings to become problem-solving forums, right? Where you go deep into something and you work through the issue. You're not simply reporting out on data, but you're actually problem solving. That's a mindset shift. That's a very different approach.
I think one of the things I like about it is it breaks the task into components so that they're dependencies. In fact, we produce a Gantt chart that will show you when these are going to get done, when that's going to get done, and where the endpoint is, which I think is helpful. But that's the other benefit of it. It forces you to think in terms of steps.
And well, that goes back to the what versus the how, and that this is the how you're going to do this, and really breaking it down into manageable pieces. And a number of those themes that we talked about earlier from process and clarity on roles and enhancing accountability and supporting knowledge transfer and training. All that, I think, ties, Craig, into your point there, breaking it down into manageable tasks. And then those are interdependent with one another, and then being able to have a tool set to be able to track that and support its successful execution. How would you say, I'm going to perhaps hit each of you with a closing question here, because I think that you've introduced, right, the concept of the playbook, and hopefully this resonates with our audience. How would you encourage someone to get started with utilizing something like the playbook?
Get started.
Chris, so Craig, is it do you need to wait until the end of the year for your strategic planning process? Can you just kind of get on with it, pick it up mid-season, mid-year, and get started now?
I think you can enter at any point. Yeah. You're always in a planning mode, right?
Yeah, so we talked about that before, right? The planning shouldn't ever die or be put on the shelf. It should be continuous. And so this is a kind of living, breathing apparatus.
So yeah, anytime you think that this is an idea you want to try, jump in and scramble to figure out what you're going to do, how you're going to organize it, who's involved, and so forth. But eventually you'll hone the process to meet your needs and what everybody else wants. So anyway, that would be my thought. Chris, don't you think? Chris?
Yeah, I fully agree. Right. There's no magic time. Right. Right. I fully agree.
So Chris, I think that you said at the outset, right, you're responsible for strategy and also a product there at Plantsmith. I imagine if I'm going to connect the dots here, that perhaps the playbook is that product area that is underneath your purview. I will put you on the spot here and ask you if our listeners have a question on the playbook, they'd like to bounce ideas off you or explore this topic in more detail, I imagine you'd be willing to take a phone call from any financial institution that would like to explore this topic in a bit more detail. Is that fair?
That's absolutely correct, right? I'd love to.
Great. Well, I appreciate you guys spending just a few minutes on this topic today. I know that this has been a long time in the making to get this concept into the market. You've had people using this for a number of years, right? It's battle tested. You guys clearly use it as well, and hopefully some of these concepts of pivoting from the what to the how. Moving from the old idea of status updates to problem solving and pairing this tool set with this mindset shift all resonate with our audience. I appreciate you, Chris and Craig, for coming in and spending a few minutes talking about this. And as I said moments ago, Chris, we'll hope that your phone rings off the hook now with folks that want to explore this idea going forward. So thanks very much, guys. We appreciate your time.
Anytime. Thanks a lot for having us.